Welcome to another Diecast model review video. Today we're going to have a look at a 1982 Corvette in 1/18 scale made by Welly. Now Welly is a very popular brand of diecast models, and they are usually the value proposition out there. So detail and quality is not quite up there with the big names like, say, Kyosho, but then again a Kyosho would easily cost 5 to 6 times more. Now on the other hand, if you want a specific car at a specific scale, you usually have no choice. In this case, if you want an 82 Corvette in 1/18 scale, well, this is it. This is the only one out there. No one else makes them. Now, having said that, let's have a look at the model. The C3 Corvette of third generation Corvette was launched in 1968. 1982 was the final production year. So during its 14-year lifespan, it went through quite a few facelifts. The C3 started looking like this in 1980 when it received its final facelift. And the biggest changes were these fully integrated bumpers and spoilers, which were quite modern at the time. So here you can see that in the front, where it's all one piece, there isn't a separate visible bumper, and the lip spoiler is molded in. And the same thing happened at the back, where the car received this integrated wing, and the whole rear bumper is just one big piece of plastic. Now, as I said, Welly is a budget brand, so they did cut some corners. For instance, there is no lettering on the tires, which is probably because they use these tires for on other models as well. But other than that, it is a fairly accurate representation of the real thing. Here you can see the rims with the Corvette logo on them. Crossfire injection, which of course on the real car would have been a badge rather than a decal. But it is historically accurate, so 1982 was the only production year where the C3 had fuel injection. Front and rear side markers. The top of the radio antenna. This would be the fuel filler cap. Now, 1982 was also the only model when the Corvette was actually a hatchback, where this rear glass would open upwards. Now, of course, it doesn't on the model, but on the real car, on all previous models, you actually had to access the boot from the front. So you would just reach in behind the seats and put in or take out your things. The T-tops on the model are transparent, so they're glass T-tops, which were an option on the real thing. And they're also removable. So there you have them. And on the real car you would store them in the boot. And you set them aside here. The door handles are a fairly accurate representation of the real thing. Now another place where Welly cut corners are the door hinges. On most 1/18 scale cars, the door hinges are, small discrete things that are more akin to a real door hinge, whereas here they just scaled up the same door hinges that they use on the smaller models. So that's not really lifelike, but once you close the door you can't see it anyway. The door panels are very much like on the real thing. And inside, of course, there is no carpeting on the floor like there would be on expensive models. But the details are very much there and they are accurate. So even down to the buttons on the driver's seat, which had an electric adjustable option. The steering wheel, the steering column, it's all very much like the real thing. Of course it is an automatic, which is again historically accurate, as in 1982 that was the only option. All cars were automatic. So overall not too bad for the sort of prices that these things are sold. But then again you have no other option. So it wouldn't matter anyway. Now the small dials in the middle of the dashboard do not have a face on this model. But the speedometer and rev counter are detailed. Now apart from the doors, the bonnet also opens the correct way, of course. And then you can see again there's pretty good detail. The wiper arm linkage is very accurate, where there is this fairly complicated movement. And then here in the front you can see the back end of the pop-up headlights. And of course the engine bay is pretty much as you would expect at this scale. And fairly good for a Welly. So of course you have small details like the alternator, the AC compressor, the steering, the power steering pump, and of course the very specific brass top brake fluid reservoir. Now, as I said, the fuel injection only came in 1982 for the final model year, and they named it Crossfire injection, which is basically a very simple throttle body fuel injection, but there are two throttle bodies and each one of them fuels 4 of the cylinders in a zigzag pattern, so they pompously named it Crossfire. Of course, this was at the height of the Malaise era, so power was a fairly low 190 horsepower from a 5.7 liter engine. Now, when the Corvette first came out in '68, they made 300 horsepower from a 5.4 liter engine. But this was the early days of emissions regulations, and manufacturers really struggled with the technology of the time. Now again, if we flip the model, we see very good detail. Like the exhaust system, it's very accurate, very much like on the real thing. And of course the suspension parts are not functional in the real way, but of course they are molded in. Here in the back you can see the leaf spring, that it's much ridiculed by many, that the Corvette has a leaf spring suspension, but it is a leaf spring mounted crosswise, and of course the suspension arms are independent, so it does have independent rear suspension even though it is sprung on leaf springs. And of course in the front there is a more conventional suspension, and again it's very well detailed and a lot of things are molded in. Here you can see the underside of the automatic gearbox, the oil pan painted in blue like they were often painted on 350 Chevys. And of course you can even see the starter motor over there and the oil filter. Now, like I said, if you want an 82 Corvette in 1/18 scale, this is the only one out there. I know of nothing else. There are others in smaller scales, but in 1/18 this is your only option. And as luck would have it, they are relatively cheap. Thanks for watching.